Hey folks, in this video I'm going to share with you some quick techniques that you can use to create corridors or hallways. And we're going to create something that's very science fiction-y, very much like the illustration that I'm showing you here. And towards the very end, I'll show you how you can replicate this effect to create this kind of stippled, vintage-looking coloring scheme here, where you've got something that looks like stippling. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. First thing we want to do is we want to look at our toolbar. We want to look for the various tools. We can start with the rectangular tool, but I think it's going to be more interesting to go with the polygon tool. And the polygon tool has different options here. If I were to go up to the top, you can see that there's a number here. And this is making a 6-sided polygon. You can always change that. And there's also a small gearbox. If you click on that gearbox, you can see that there are different proportions here. You just want to make sure that the star ratio is set to 100%. And you can have the other options as is. So what I'll do now is I'll just make a shape. And we can see that that shape is showing up as both a fill and a stroke. Now in this particular case, the fill and the stroke are both set to black. And I'm looking at the properties panel. So I want to choose no fill. So if I click on the swatch for fill and choose no fill, I can make that setting. And then for the stroke, I'm going to go ahead and adjust the stroke and make that stroke 15 pixels, just to give it a little bit of extra thickness. So with that in place, what I can do is I can start to adjust the shape of this hexagon. If I hit Command T, and if I hold down the Shift key, I can go ahead and lengthen the shape. I want the corridor to be somewhat wide in scope. And then with the transform tool still active, if I right click, I can choose perspective, and I can simply drag one corner out. And I have something that looks like this. I can hit return. Now I can make a duplicate. If I hit Command J, I can make a copy of that. Command T to bring up the transform tool. I'll select one of the handles, pull it all the way in. And if I want the corridor to be very, very long, I can make this secondary hexagon much, much smaller. Now the interesting thing is, these two shapes here define the corridor. And if I want a more neutral view, kind of like a standard view, I can kind of move this hexagon here. But if I want to emphasize the ceiling, I can move the hexagon further down. If I want to emphasize the floor, I can move the hexagon up. So depending upon the type of framing that you want for this particular shot, you have options. You can also move it to the opposite side. So this will kind of give me more of a bird's eye view, and this will give me much more of a worm's eye view. So I'm interested in creating something that looks like a worm's eye view. So I'm just going to move this hexagon over here. I'll hit return to go ahead and commit it. Now all we need to do is we need to connect these lines together. Now, one thing that I would recommend, you can certainly do this through digital tools, but I also recommend having a plastic ruler, which can also be super helpful when you're trying to quickly make connections. So I'm going to start off by making a brand new layer. I'm going to start from the corner of this first hexagon. I'll just draw a line that goes all the way out. And what I'll do is I'll hit Command T. We get a pivot point. I'm going to move the pivot point, and I'm going to choose left. So you can see that right there. And now I can rotate this out. And I've got one segment. I can hit Command J to make a copy, Command T. Move the location to the next corner, and move the pivot point to that corner, and then rotate this out. Hit return, hit Command J, move the object to its next location, adjust the pivot point. And so basically I'm matching each of the corners together. So Command J, Command T, move it into its new location, adjust the pivot point. Now, if I were to do this myself, because I don't have my camera on, I would actually be using my ruler because it's way faster. And so we'll just add 2 more line segments here. Command J, Command T. You want to move the object to its new location first, then adjust the pivot point. And then you're given something that looks like this. So that's a solution for having to draw diagonal lines. So you can use your ruler or you can use this particular technique. So I'm going to merge all of those radial lines by holding down Shift, Command E. So those lines are all in their own layer. And I want to now get rid of all the excess. There's several different ways of removing all these extra line segments that go beyond our corridor. I'll show you a simple way that I like to use. I'll make a new layer. I'll use the magic wand tool and I'll select everything on the outside of this outer hexagon. I'll bring the layer back that contains the radial lines and I'll hit Command X, and that just basically cleans that up. And if we want to add a little bit more spice to this hallway to kind of make it have a little bit more form or dimension, you're not seeing me do this on camera because my camera is off, but I'm using my plastic ruler. I'll use my brush tool. I can simply just drag a segment that connects the midpoint of this inner shape with the outer shape, and I can just kind of rinse and repeat that process to just add a little bit more variety. So we'll just make one more line segment like so. And so I've got something that looks interesting. And what I can do here is matching the inner segment right here. I can just match that same perspective. And I can create some type of an opening. So if I wanted to have like a window that goes out to space, I can go ahead and do that. And I can fill in this region like so. And I can obviously do some cleanup work, but I'm not really going to do that here. So I've got this kind of portal to space. I'll now make a new layer, use the magic wand tool. This is where I'm going to fill my background. And so now we have this interesting looking corridor. We can add other elements to it. We can add panels. Very easy to add panels just to kind of make this look a little bit more sci-fi. So we'll make a brand new layer. Everything I'm creating is going on a separate layer. I'll use the brush tool. And if I wanted to just create an individual panel, I'm trying to be parallel with the other inner hexagon. And so I have something like that. If I zoom in, you can always add, say, controls, little buttons and screens. I'll close this gap here. I mean, if you think about the 50s panels, they're very analog. So I have something that looks like this. So all that's left here is to go ahead and create a little bit of atmosphere for this corridor. I can take all of the existing, let me see if I want to flatten those layers out. Actually, I don't want to do that. Let me just hide the outlines that I've got here. And I'll also hide the paneling here. I'll make a brand new layer. I'll use the magic wand tool. And what I can do now is I can use a brush. So I'm going to use the soft round pressure, opacity, and flow brush. So it's this guy right here. If I crank it up, I can make a very big brush, which is what I'm going to do, make it roughly 500 pixels. I'm going to make sure black is selected. And make the brush even bigger here. And just kind of paint with it. To where I've got something like this. And what I can do now is I can choose, instead of a normal layer style, I can choose dissolve. And then I can bring back all of those layers that were previously hidden. So in this particular case, maybe I'll just drop the opacity a little bit so that we can make out the hallway and some of the other elements there. So you've got this kind of nice grain, and you can do a lot of really interesting things with it. So that's the technique to create a science fiction type corridor or hallway, and to kind of give it that old school 50s grain effect. You can add some space elements by using a dot texture or a grain texture to kind of complete the effect. If there's any interest in seeing how I do that, let me know in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.